This is Mark Howell, Chair of the Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force. And so I'm calling the meeting to order, and I'll ask for a roll call. So Gordon Brockway.
Present.
Scott Hopkinson.
Present. Present.
David Hessel.
Present.
And Gail Heyer.
I'm present.
And myself, Mark Howell. So today is Thursday, October 14th. And like I said, it's about 6:36. So given that the meeting is being recorded and it's being held virtually under the provisions of Mass General laws that permit virtual meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is open to the public. Saying if you don't want to be recorded, you can either remain quiet or leave the meeting. So we should pick a clerk for the meeting, and then we have some minutes, and we were just discussing that. So while somebody is rushing to raise their hand to be the clerk this time around, I'll just talk a little bit about the process for minutes. So once minutes get issued in draft form, the clerks will send them to me and I will distribute them. And what we've been doing is we've been distributing a Word document with track changes. If you have changes that are more easily just done than communicated, my recommendation is go ahead and edit the document directly. And you can really feel free to send that document directly back to the clerk. Just do it in a one-on-one fashion and say, here's the things I noted. I will mention that in the September 23rd minutes, which were just distributed about 2 hours ago, I noticed a couple of typos. I know one that I actually missed, so I fixed a couple before I distributed them to the rest of the committee, just in the interest. So if you have further changes, just add them in there and it'll indicate who made them and they can go back. Otherwise, if we only have minor updates, we'll discuss that when it comes up in the meeting and go forward. Did that answer the question that you were asking about process, Gail?
I think so. Yes. Thanks.
Okay. Good.
I'll go ahead. No, proceed.
Do I have a volunteer to be clerk tonight? I know this is a tough job, but
I can do it. I haven't done it in a few weeks.
okay. Thank you, Gail. Okay. So given that, and I guess it's, we as I mentioned, we have two sets of minutes which are distributed. The September 23rd minutes were distributed a couple of hours ago, and I will understand if people haven't had a chance to see them and look them over. They're about 2 pages long. And then there's a September 30th minutes that were distributed yesterday. Again, that's a little late in the cycle for this meeting, but I'm willing to hear discussion about whether people feel they've had sufficient time to review those minutes and act on them. And we're still pending the
October 7th
October
or mine.
7th minutes.
Yeah, I got 2 in a row, so I'm trying to catch up. That's why I wouldn't volunteer until I'm caught up.
Appreciate it, Scott. And
hey, and I apologize. I just started a new job 5 weeks ago in a massively complex surgical robotics system, and I've been flat out. I do have a question. I noticed my notes were probably too detailed, and because there is a YouTube recording of the meeting, maybe that's something we would, and because we're meeting every week, it might be worthwhile to try, I know that next time I take minutes, I'm going to try and make them more summary oriented rather than detailed oriented. I think I worked out this first one I did was 7 pages, and probably 2 to 3 would be more appropriate. So maybe that's just something for all of us to think about. No specific action required, but it's just a comment.
Yeah,
Scott, do you think you'd be able to use the observation that you just made and go back and revisit that version, because I just scanned it quickly, and I found it difficult to read quickly.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it's-
it's a matter of investment of time versus the value proposition here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things I thought about was if I had enough time and I was anal retentive enough about this, I would have gone back and listened to the YouTube for it and made sure my
Mm.
notes were accurate and representative. But I frankly just don't have the time to invest in doing that.
Yeah.
I could, if the committee asks, I can go back and summarize what I've done. If you want me to do that, I'd prefer just to leave it as it is and move and do that the next time, which is obviously the October 7th ones, which I have are owed. I will make sure that I do that. So it's 2, 3, 4 pages at the max instead of 7.
Yeah, Scott, I also tend to take very detailed notes. Maybe it's an engineering thing. But I mean, I'd rather have more detail than less. So I'm comfortable with leaving your notes the way they are. I had a number of, fairly minor edits, and I added a few things in where I thought you said something important and maybe didn't note it yourself. But so for next time, this is
All right.
like a learning process. Try to make it a little shorter.
Yeah,
It's easier on everybody, and I don't like to just rely on the videos, because although it is nice if you want to review it, I don't think people should feel obligated. And I think the law requires us to write minutes and not just.
No, I'm not suggesting that. Yeah, that's fine. I think if we're fair enough, I think we've discussed this. It's given me some guidance on how to proceed for the next round and the next time I do it after this. So
Yeah,
very
the
good.
key things that have to be collected, of course, are motions and votes and things of that nature. The discussion is a little bit, up to interpretation. I think I'm unclear on what we can have, actually expect in terms of how long video may be available when that link goes to. It's not like we've given it to an archivist or something like that. So
That's an interesting point. That used to be that the Minuteman Media Network, or under the old name, that was archived for a fairly long period of time.
I believe
Meaning like 2 years minimum.
Yeah, but minutes, I think, of meetings are actually held forever. So my sense
of
is
course.
that they should capture enough information that people who want to know what was discussed in the general sense of what the outcome of that. And I believe that your notes did in fact cover that. Although I will say that I did not go back and compare them to the video either. I compared them to my recollection and my notes, which is what we did back in the day, right? Before we videotaped everything we did. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. I tend to read them to see whether they say anything that disagrees with memory, recollection, and the discussion, and that's what I look for.
Yeah, I mean, one way to think of it is like if you're going into an exam, you don't try to bring in notes that recreate all of the material that was presented to you in the class and all the books. You just can't. You gotta boil it down.
Mhm.
So I think there's this old expression: I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have the time. When you're right, when you're in rush, then you end up with writing a long letter. And the point being is that, and at each one of these stages, as the discussion turned from topic to topic, we go out in a bunch of different directions and then come back in, and something happens along the way. And it isn't really necessary to retrace the whole path. I don't think. So anyway, I thought that David, your minutes were a little bit lighter.
They were.
That was fine by me. As far as, I'd be actually happy to accept your minutes with the correction that my name is spelled, Gordon is spelled with an O.
My apologies.
And the other thing is You weren't using the same tool I do, but my preference is if you can run it through Word's grammar, spelling and grammar check before you distribute it, then nobody else, then other people will get that, and as they're reviewing it, Word will highlight all these things that may or not be a problem, but if you can make it go away, it just makes review a little bit easier for everybody
Yeah,
else.
I did it in Pages, and then converted it to Word. And I
Does
forgot,
Pages have a grammar checker?
totally forgot to grammar check it before I sent it out.
Yeah.
My
I
stupid,
didn't really see any spelling errors. It was all stylistic, and
yeah,
because of that, completely ignorable. So
right.
I'm not telling you that there's a problem there. It's just like in terms of just lightening the
No, I
load on
appreciate it.
everybody else. Yeah.
Right.
I just got pushed it out from Pages to Word without any, I didn't even reread it, quite frankly. I read it as I was doing it and didn't go back and check it.
So, yeah, and I just, mostly what I picked up was a couple of double words and some extra spaces and things
Yeah.
that were
Yeah.
highlighted. I think it would make sense to replace the picture link to just text that says, YouTube link, and I'd be happy to do that and redistribute it. I also noticed that besides, I missed Gordon being misspelled, so thank you for doing that. I also noticed in the very last line about adjournment, Gail's last name was for some reason Hunt instead of Hire, so I just made those two additional changes. Beyond that, if the group is okay, I'll change the picture to text that says, link to YouTube recording of minute of meeting or something like that, and otherwise leave the content alone.
By the way, I explicitly made sure that it was pasted without a hidden link when I did that, which takes an extra step to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important, because you never know when somebody's going to get a photocopy or something that they actually need to literally transcribe the one in order to use it.
Well, I would move that we accept. Well, start with September 23rd with the few changes that you just listed, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. So Gordon moves. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Scott. Okay. Any further discussion about the September 23rd minutes?
Oh, wait, hold it. And just that who will, and it's on, and you will make the corrections, Mark, and
Yeah, I don't
post
mind
it?
fixing it. It sounded like David was a little unclear on how to fix that link.
Okay.
It is a link. I'll check to make sure that it is the right link to the right recording of our meeting, to the recording of our meeting, and just change that. I don't know why. I've never seen any minutes with an actual sort of, well, I guess there's must be some with pictures in them, but that one's unnecessary.
Oh, let me just say one other thing, and that is that it's the well, it's a requirement actually to include with the minutes that are posted copies of any materials that were considered.
Mhm.
So the easiest way to do that is to actually cut and paste them or append them or stick them onto the end of the minutes, because that way they don't get lost. It's all one file.
Yeah.
Now the September 23rd, I think that we might have had the that what would you call it, that not the highlights, the focus points.
No, that was the 30th. That's the one I did. And I actually thought about doing that. And part of the problem I had was the headers and footers were changed. And I decided not to merge it for just exactly that reason. So that I had snapshotted the focus areas document from Google Docs the day before our meeting. And during the meeting, we discussed and said that I would take that and distribute it with the minutes. And so it could be inserted, but I'll have to do, if I were doing it, I'd have to do something to make sure it's carries through with the integrity of the headers and footers and things of that nature.
Okay, well, back to September 23rd, the only other material considered would be the charge, right?
Right, there was a map that Mark put up on the screen that should have been in the minutes.
It'd be great if we could, but I don't think that's completely necessary. You could have a URL to the, what do you think, Mark?
Well, the broadband available map, which is what we looked at, is actually one of the links in what I've been calling the reference material and have been carrying forward in each of our agendas. So anybody that wants to access that can access it by just looking at any agenda for our meeting. I've kind of been, and I'll have a comment on that in a minute as well, but I've been sort of adding certain things that I think are important documents to understand and that we may reference in any given meeting to the agenda, just to keep them rolling forward for us every time.
Well, I'm willing to accept, cut and paste of the URLs.
Yeah.
But as you know, history would prefer a verbatim copy, but I'm not going to insist on it.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing we could really do with that is like grab a screenshot from the video of the part of the map that I put on the screen. That's
Sure.
a little, possible.
So anyway, sorry for adding a little bit more work to that, but
Yeah.
I think we're in good shape on September 23rd.
Okay.
Gordon, I think this
we-
means you get an extra round of doing minutes.
Well, I've been doing them for 12 years.
I'm
Yeah.
sure. I'm sorry. I just thought of
Yeah.
a little
there's-
levity.
Okay. So given that,
Do we need a roll?
we do need a roll call vote for the minutes of September 23rd. Gail, you want to take the roll?
Yes, Mark Howell,
Aye.
David Hessel,
Aye.
Scott Hopkinson,
Aye.
Gordon Brockway,
Aye.
Gail Heyer, aye.
Okay. So that's unanimous. Okay, and by the way, just because I think it's worth noting, we don't have an actual web page or anything on the town website for this task force. However, what happens is once we've got an approved copy, I send those into the town clerk, and the town clerk posts them as minutes that's associated with the calendar entry of the meeting that you're talking about. So the first set of minutes from our first meeting was, I guess that's whatever it was, September 15th, have already been posted and they're on the town website connected to that meeting. And when we finish with creating a final copy of these, and to that end, I don't mind. I send those in as a PDF so that it doesn't get further modified inadvertently, and so I can do things like grab the multiple PDF documents and I'll stick them together to your point about reference materials, and I'm willing to do that.
Thank you.
So, if you don't have PDF editing ability, although Macs make it pretty easy because it's part of preview. Yeah. Okay. So September 30th. So we've already had a little bit of discussion about those. Do we have some more discussion about the September 30th minutes?
I'm not really that picky about this stuff, so I just as soon get it up there, get it into the public record, and move on. Particularly with the fast pace of weekly meetings, we really don't have a lot of time. Anyway, so I'm sort of inclined to just take it the way it is, and maybe we can improve them as they go forward. I didn't see anything that jumped out at me as being incorrect. So does anybody else feel that
My
way?
only question is, Gail, are we talking about Gail's version? So both.
No, I only sent that to you, Scott.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and there was one that ended in TC.
That came from
Yeah.
me originally.
Yeah, that
Okay.
was the track changes version. If you wanted to make an edit that you wanted to send
okay.
back.
So
all
the
that
two are the same?
same document. So Gail, do you
All right.
want to just talk briefly about what changes you're suggesting?
Sure. Yeah, I'll skip the typo type of edits. On page 4, committee discussed town survey. I recalled that I think Gordon was the one who said it, but we said that the prior town survey questions regarding broadband are on the CMLP website. So, yeah, so anyway, Scott, I'm just reading what I have in the notes that I emailed to you, or the minutes that I emailed to you. And then the second item under that town survey discussion was, I think we.
Can I interrupt and make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Maybe we should, I've looked briefly through these. Maybe what we should do is just go ahead and redistribute this to the entire group, let them look at it and vote on them next week, and let's get to the business of the committee.
Okay, that's okay with me.
That's my suggestion, just to kind of expedite our meeting time is so precious. And frankly, I think those clarifications, my scan of what you've done all seem very appropriate in my opinion, but so we can cover it now if you want, or it might be more efficient just to vote it next time, and I'm hopefully by then I will be able to get the next one caught up as well. So it's up to you guys.
You're handling the process. I'm pretty comfortable with I tend to lean towards where Gordon is, which is we're going weekly, and I like the idea of finishing them and getting them posted so that people who may have missed and frankly don't want to listen to 90 minutes of video for each meeting we've had can read something and
then let's I agree. Let's go through it. I'm let's Gail, go ahead and I'll be quiet.
Okay, yeah, so the first one was prior town survey questions are on the website. So we don't need to ask them about that. And then I think it was suggested that our task force recommend ways for the light board to track progress of broadband growth. I don't know if that's part of town survey, but I thought we had talked about it would be good for us to recommend ways that the light board might track the progress of. Does anyone recall what that was?
So that was actually from my recollection, that was starting in more or less the second paragraph of page 4. So the committee discussed examples, discussed metrics. Yeah, so I didn't put maybe what we could add to that if you want, or something to the effect that we might make that as part of our recommendation to the light plant or town. And then I listed the metrics that we talked about, but I did leave out that part of it, which is to say that could be part of our recommendation.
Just to be sure I'm on the same page here. Am I reading? I read something, and this is page 4. Backlog expressed. A committee discussed metrics. Examples were provided. Is that the paragraph we're talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and then it's like then it says Gordon consider KPI. I'm not going to be picky, but I don't actually know what that means. That sounds to me, this reads to me like something that the note taker took down.
Yeah. So
it jogs perhaps something in your memory, but it's not, doesn't help me that much, except that I know it's probably generally that
key performance indicators is a term, and it's very commonly used in
No, I mean, I know, I think I used that term, but what are we trying to say here?
Yeah, I'll add that.
I thought that was a subset of backlog expressed in time, and that you were agreeing that the backlog expressed in time could be a key performance indicator. So because it was indented under that's how I read it.
Okay, yeah. All right, fine, it's fine. I don't really want to drill too deeply into this.
No, that's all right.
I think there's a lot of good stuff here.
I captured 2 comments already. One is about the metrics and clarify that we would make that might be a part of recommendation for the light board. And then Gordon, I've added spell out key performance indicators and what that means.
Okay,
thank you.
So I'm now editing Gail's version again with track changes on again, and you'll be able to see where they are.
Okay. Anything else from you?
Yeah, there were like 1 or 2 more things. So in the middle of page 5, we had a discussion. It's right before the section C discussion in the document. We talked about like critical availability and customers who might really rely on broadband for like life safety things. And I thought it was important that we document. I think well, at least Scott and Mark, I think, suggested that we don't want to, that the town does not want, this is what I wrote. Scott suggested that the town does not want to obligate broadband service to meet critical life safety needs. The infrastructure is not designed with the required redundancy. So I just thought it might be important to document that.
Yeah, Gail, actually, the paragraph right above that, I had tried to address that because it says is service capable of supporting customers with critical availability. So but I'm okay with adding that to further highlight that.
Okay, good.
Could we fix the spelling of Roden Brockway?
Of course.
And then let's see, yeah, my last comment is at the bottom of this page. We were talking about section C, and I said there was some overlap between sections B and C. And then we got into a bit of a discussion about the categories, like the categories of getting fiber from the street to the home. So section C of our charge is, you know, how do you get the fiber into the businesses and into the homes when it's in the right of way. And I made a comment like, my house is really easy. I live right on the street where we have an overhead wire, pole is right there. It was very straightforward, but you know, other connections are much more challenging. And we had talked about like there are, you know, categories of problems that, and we can kind of bunch people into groups and, you know, develop recommendations, you know, for different groups. So I just wanted to make that a little bit more specific because that's kind of going towards our recommendations. You know, I think Scott said that some categories may have a lot of people in them, some have fewer.
Do you want me to, maybe it would work for me just to present on the screen what your edit is and people can look at it and say if they like it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that'd be
fine.
good.
Hold on. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Move this
Yeah,
over.
there you go.
So there you go. Now, Gail, you can talk to it.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify what I said, which is not critical, but what I'm talking about is the top of that page where I said, you know, the document divides customers into categories based on the problem space and accomplishing last mile. Like, you know, David has talked a lot about Concord Green has a particular problem, and a lot of the multifamilies have that type of problem. So I just wanted to get at, you know, we're trying to understand these categories and group the challenges by category so we can address it, come up with solutions.
I think that expands on that discussion and is useful.
Okay, let's just scan down. Is there anything else? Oh yeah, you're right. That should be housing.
Yeah. Okay.
And you added a note here about contractual obligation.
Well, yeah, that's a better term than performance requirement.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Right.
What I did is I took my notes as fast as I could while we're talking, and then I tried to make them at least semi-readable because they tend not to be. Okay, shall we make a motion to accept these as modified, or what do you?
Yeah, so let's go with yeah, either I'm willing to take the sense of the committee as to whether they want to see these sort of cleaned up, but I'm willing to say, you know, basic typos and you know, that Scott discovers can be corrected, and I would be happy to do this. Like I noticed under section C discussion, oh yeah, you have define. I thought it was D, but you crossed out T. That's fine. It looks fine.
I didn't actually do that. I think Gail did.
Gail did it. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then yeah, I'm willing. This is improved. So thank you very much. And
Okay.
Well,
Thanks
maybe
for
we'll
doing
use
that,
this model
Scott.
next time. I'll distribute them, track changes, and I'll only send the track changes. You guys mark it up. I'll bring it back and we'll walk through it quickly and then we'll approve them. That might be a nice way to do this.
I think that is.
Okay.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
Oh, it's oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I thought we were going to go ahead and approve it sort of at risk. It's like, this is
Right.
close enough with some corrections we can. Okay, so I move to approve the September 30th minutes with the corrections noted and with the potential additional grammar spelling. Anyway, I move to accept the September 30th minutes with changes as noted.
Second.
Thank you.
I
Any
can take
further
a,
discussion? Okay, Gail?
yeah, I'll take a roll call. Mark Howell,
Aye.
Gail Heyer, I, David Hessel,
Aye.
Gordon Brockway,
Aye.
and Scott Hopkinson.
Aye.
And that's a vote. Thank you very much. It's useful and I appreciate how much work this is. And I think that it's really going to be helpful for people. And I also think that because of where we are in the process, where we're kind of discussing defining terms and sort of creating our, baseline problem definition, it's a useful thing to try to stay. It's more important to be current than when it comes down to actually voting recommendations and final reports and so forth. I think it'll be more necessary to have well vetted documents in front of us. And to that end, I think we'll be talking about scheduling quite a bit tonight. So that's great. So we've got 2 sets of minutes in place. We'll polish those off and move on to the next piece of the discussion. So I had a couple of quick things that I wanted to mention in terms of today's agenda. I did add a link to the underground bylaw. I was able to locate that on the town website. It's shockingly sparse as a bylaw. We may want to glance at it at some point, but we talk about it a lot, and it left me with the question of maybe there are policies in place or even just conventions in place that at the light plant that are almost ruling that process more than the bylaw itself. Although the bylaw is also, even though it's sparse, it's also quite clear what it means. And so I'm just mentioning that.
Much was that in the agenda?
It's in the agenda, but it actually isn't the link. He pasted it without making it the link. So
I'm sorry. Did I
Yeah.
not do that?
Yeah, let me see if I can get it and I'll put it in the chat.
Words
For
that
this.
say no new construction is not a link.
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize for that then.
That's all right. Let me Google it and see if I can drop it in the chat.
Well, and
I mean, let me just say that to the light plant, what matters is the small amount that's added to the fee, and added to people's light bill. And that's really the key.
yeah.
And then it fortunately there's a kind of an implicit adjustment for inflation because light bills go up over time. I don't know whether or not that's been able to keep up with the cost of construction. But anyway, so that's it's pretty simple from the light plant's point of view.
Gordon, I think you're talking about the underground surcharge.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a part of the rate structure.
Yeah.
Actually, there's
Okay, so
no
this is
mention of
different?
the surcharge in the bylaw.
Mhm.
And the reason and I just brought the bylaw up on the screen and we'll attach to the meeting, but from the town website, and I'll correct the link in the agenda. But the idea is that essentially this is the whole thing. It's apparently been modified by town meeting, but not since 2001. And it basically says no utility can construct install or construct except by way of direct one-for-one replacement or upgrading any existing facilities, any poles, overhead wires, associated overhead structures along or across any public or private way in the town within the parts listed in section 2, and any poles or wires associated with overhead structures installed or construction and violated, which shall be immediately removed by the utility responsible. And basically it says, you know, it applies to new public and private ways. It applies to any way where the wires and utilities are already underground, effective at the date of the bylaw, which was April 1987 originally. Any way in which the wires or facilities have been placed underground since the passage of the bylaw, and any way in which underground conduit or manhole system or its functional equipment has been installed that is not fully utilized, or for which there are active plans, and then it lays out some fines for those things. So it's pretty, it's very, you know, I was surprised at how, to some extent, how clear it is and specific, and yet it's also incredibly brief. It basically says, you know, you got to be underground every place that underground already exists, and wherever it's been, and every new place is supposed to plan for underground. But it doesn't say anything about what kind of conduit is necessary or any of those other kind of engineering things.
So, and I'm reading it live action here. It doesn't look like it's incentivizing or requiring existing overhead utility lines to go underground. Is that right?
You know, it's always been, and it's basically saying you can't construct or expand anything. So it allows for direct one-for-one replacement. That's the only exception. Otherwise, no utility shall construct any poles and overhead wires associated with overhead structures along any private ways. So, you know, if you
Yeah, but then it says within the parts listed in section 2, and section 2
Right.
doesn't include those areas like my neighborhood where all the utilities are overhead.
Right.
So that's interesting. So that there's not an incentive to get well, at least not in this bylaw, there's not an incentive to get the existing overhead lines underground.
Right. And you can add overhead in overhead areas, which, you know, is
But
exactly
even
what
that's-
happened in the fiber.
Yeah, actually, that's it requires a close reading, because you could actually you could read this language to restrict that, because it says you can't add any new wires. I think where I'd agree with you is that if you can treat the fiber that's being added as an upgrade to existing wires, then you can kind of get away with that. But I don't, if it means adding a new wires, if it says that no new wires are forbidden, then that would be a problem.
Mhm.
Anyway, I'd rather not like really head down that path.
Yeah.
The way it's being interpreted and acted upon is fine, and it's what we've got. And I don't want to yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just
The
leave it at
reason
that.
it was noted in some of the minutes we just approved, and we had discussed it at the last 2 meetings, that there was the underground bylaw, and I said I would dig it up, and I
Yeah.
have dug it up. And I apologize for the link not working, so I should have double checked that, but we'll make sure that it is included in the reference materials. So I was really just kind of closing off that to do by bringing it up, and we can, you know, work on whether there's any implications for that, you know, at a future time if we need to. Okay, the monthly chairs meeting is next Wednesday. And the reason I'm mentioning that is I do intend to go and talk about where we are so far in terms of our progress and whatever plans we have thus far. And if there's anything else that the task force wants me to represent about that. I think this is a good place to thank you, Gordon. I was at yesterday morning's light board meeting. I know they asked you, how's it going with this committee? And I thought you gave a very, succinct and accurate update on what we've been doing so far. So I appreciate that in your role.
Thank you. It would have required some time to write a shorter update, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh gosh, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to emphasize the positive. And, I think that there's always it's like, okay, what is this other group doing? What are they going to do and all that? And I just want the message to be that things are going well here, and it's going to be, I think we're going to really offer something helpful and useful and actionable to the light board when we're done.
So my goal is to live up to that standard in terms of providing an opportunity for the chairs. And so what this meeting is, in case anybody's unfamiliar with it, is once a month, the chairpersons of all of the town committees are invited to one meeting where Terry Ackerman, as chair of the select board, leads the meeting and offers some updates from that perspective, and then they run through everybody else, and it's kind of just a sharing meeting that gives people an opportunity to see if there's something coming up that they want to go to. I listened to the last one. We hadn't met yet, so I didn't say anything, but I think it might make sense to mention this effort and at least solicit input if people think they have it to come and talk to us. I think Carlin might have said something about it last month, so I just thought I'd do that. And the last thing I wanted to just report back on was I did in fact send the data request for the GIS parcel information and the broadband orders to town staff this week. I sent it on Tuesday to the GIS person, Jill Moonhair, Greg Marcinek, Jason Bulger, and I feel like there was somebody else on that. I think that those were the three people. So they could begin to look. I do not yet Jill did ask me a couple of questions for clarification because I had used some acronyms and but she hasn't indicated exactly when we'll be able to get that information back. And also at the light board meeting yesterday, I was interested to see the financial reporting package that Matt Cummings presented. And, I noted that Wendy had pointed out some things that were problematic about the broadband financials, but it did seem to me that when they do update that and get that report corrected, it might make some sense for us to at least look at it and maybe even ask Matt and Greg to come and talk to us a little bit about broadband's financials, because I think that will inform this group. So if there's general agreement about that, I think that we may want to look for a schedule for that in the next few meetings, so we can get in and get those questions answered by those that are authoritative on the subject.
I think that would be helpful.
Helpful.
No, I agree.
Okay, good.
Mark,
Mhm.
two quick updates. One is Carlin asked me to provide a quick summary for the input of the PEG Access Committee as to what our activities were, and I gave her a quick update that she included in the meeting last Thursday. And then the other one is a question, which is you mentioned the GIS data request has gone in. Can you talk about the plan for the request to go into the broadband? And
You mean for the orders?
Orders and other information that we're looking for from, and were you going to meet with the gentleman, I'm sorry, his name slipped my mind, to talk about what was easily available?
Yeah, so I offered, I basically lifted the section from the focus areas that we talked about on the data request that we looked at last week, put that into an email and sent it in with a few words of explanation and an offer to meet with them and discuss what's the easiest, most straightforward way to get through that. I didn't want to be super prescriptive and have them come back and say, sure, we can have that in 6 months. I'd much rather know what's available soon. So that was the request and the offer to talk about it in more detail.
Okay, and I take it the follow-up conversation hasn't occurred yet.
No, that hasn't. So I heard
Okay.
from Jill. Jill understood what I was asking for. From my knowledge, the way that we structured that, it should be pretty directly available to us from the data that builds that broadband availability map and from the information that's in orders. I think the part that's going to be interesting is the sort of categorization, the column that we're going to need to ask that says, why is it that, street XYZ doesn't have fiber on it? That may be something that needs to be sort of manually coded, but someone with knowledge can probably get through that in an hour. Are you on mute?
Yeah, sorry. Maybe it makes sense to get the data without that coding first, and then.
Right.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
And,
Thanks for
and
the
I
update.
think in terms of what we were talking about a little bit with Gail's edit to the minutes, things like what are the reasons why certain multi-unit, multi-address addresses don't have fiber. We're going to have that, as far as I know, that's never been encoded in any way. And so we may need to come up with, sort of look at the reasons and then come up with categories of our own and invent that. So I think that part of the analysis is work that we're going to need to do ourselves. And then maybe validate that and come up with some explanations so it's usable for the future. Okay, those were sort of the updates that I had on old business, which I probably should have had an entry for on the thing. Is there anybody else that has anything they want to report since last week? As long as we're okay.
Yeah, I just say one thing that came out at the Light Board meeting was that they really are trying to accelerate deployment of service, and they've been tracking at under 30 new houses a month, and they'd like to almost double that. And they're talking about hiring more people and bringing in a third party outfit to help with the push. So anyway, that kind of fits into, it's not news necessarily, but we certainly got into a hole during COVID, and they're making efforts to dig out of that hole. And I'm just kind of curious, what do you think, Mark, about the idea that if they, and then there's a slowdown or even a stoppage during the winter, do you think it's possible that they might have not considered the possibility of continuing installations in those neighborhoods that have not undergrounded in the winter? I mean, who am I to suggest them about how they should be operating anything? I'm just, I'm just a board member. I don't really know how the details of this work, but maybe they didn't think of that. I don't know. Does that sound like a useful, or is it that you can't really actually do the physical work? I mean, you got to bring it inside, but it seems to me like as if, I hate to see it go to zero. So maybe there's some things they could do that they haven't thought of. And is it out of line for me to suggest it? Well,
from experience, what we discovered about the way the fiber was constructed in this system, in the overhead areas, the original specification for the fiber construction was supposed to create a situation where the splice cases that would be used to connect the service drops for individual houses would be able to be brought down off of the overhead wire and into the back of a truck so that splicing could be done in a temperature controlled environment. What we found after actually working with the system was that the amount of slack that we thought was going to be constructed in some places wasn't actually created. And the practical effect of that was that the technicians, when they're adding new drops in the overhead areas, often ended up doing the splice in the splice case out of a bucket truck in the air. And of course, that's much more challenging in cold weather to both get positioned and frankly do the required temperature control. And so that was why installations tended to approach zero in the winter. And you know, the fix for that, of course, is any new construction. We really made sure that there was sufficient slack to really get that stuff down off the pole and into the truck where the work could be done and then get it back. Which still doesn't mean, I mean, it's obviously New England. There's sometimes when you can't even get a splice case down, you know, as a practical matter, but you know, barring that, there's a lot more days that you can get the work done. So that was kind of an ongoing challenge on this system all the way along.
We had discussed previously that certain kind of work could be done during the summer to prep to get the fiber into the building, where the ONT and internal hookup could be done during the winter. But starting now, you know, I just recall from just typing the notes, we said late November till late April was very, very difficult to make progress.
Yeah, they've expanded the window, but it's still tight. So
Yeah,
that's what I was impressed by, though, was that in the director's report, apparently they are making progress with a second engineer and a fourth technician, which obviously gives them more capacity to work. Although it sounded like the contracted services that might accelerate building were still kind of in progress.
and potential shortages of glass.
Yes. Oh, that was interesting. Sorry.
Yeah,
Good.
that's a problem.
So apparently, you know, COVID supply chain, insert your desire here, problem.
Yeah,
And in this case, it's 2-strand fiber stock. So, and this is probably a good place to just go back and remind ourselves that those types of things, the things that we just spent a few minutes discussing, those are the operational issues that the light plan is going for. And I think it's certainly appropriate for the light board to be asking questions about that and monitoring them. I think our role in this particular task force is to think out beyond those things. So there will be a time when, you know, supply chain issues, whatever they are, have been resolved one way or the other by the marketplace. And our question really is, you know, establishing the goals around how to, you know, if, when, and how to complete building the fiber network itself, and what resources should be set aside to those long-term goals, and then recommending policies that guide that vision. And I think that keeps us in a different strategic time frame and in the right lane for our work. So I'm going to encourage us.
yeah, I agree. I was getting a little bit granular on that, though. Another granular suggestion that's come up in these discussions is how come we're not keeping track of people that want the service but can't get it? That doesn't even get captured. But again, that's relatively granular. Something at the high level that I think that we could really potentially offer would be getting back to town meeting. And we give it's an ask, right? It's a warrant article, and we say, look, town meeting, we'd like you to provide your approval, you know, support for something big, something important, something that the light board going in its lane, the management of the town and the employees of the town don't individually have the scope to actually step up to and do.
I agree completely with that.
Yeah, again, let's get to the problem statement, figure out what it is, what the cost is, and then we can go to decide what the big ask is and how to fund it. You know, I think there's a lot of different opportunities to fund things. increasing the distribution to those folks that the fiber already passes their property is going to throw off a lot of cash. So,
Right. Okay. So this is you can tell that we're already, I think, in our heads shifting towards solution definition. What I was hoping we would do with today's meeting, and under section 3, which is continuing the discussion of the work plan, is I thought this was a really good point in time. We've made an initial data request to take a look at how much time do we have and how should we allocate that time over between now and certainly this town meeting, in the end of this coming town meeting's deadline. So I had, hopefully I didn't screw up this link, but I had attached a link to the annual town meeting calendar for 21, 22. In fact, what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up our agenda.
Bad news, you did, and I couldn't give you the other link because you can't. I guess there's no chat available in these.
Yeah, I have the.
Well, there's a list, Mark, in the agenda about key town meeting dates.
Yes, and that's what I extracted in there. So I'm going to just put that on the screen. So I mapped out all of the Thursdays that we could possibly meet. And the idea here was there are some dates from that annual town meeting calendar. The annual town meeting calendar, if you haven't seen it, looks like this. It's so there's a joint forum has already taken place, actually. The next thing is the November 4th capital plan. And to Gordon's point a minute ago, if we thought that what we were going to do was go ask the town to vote a big capital expenditure, i.e. a borrowing for fiber construction in this town meeting, we would actually need to be ready to talk to the finance committee about that on November 4th. I mean, clearly we're nowhere near that, but that's how fast, to get to a May 1st town meeting, the dates like that are on the table. Anyway, back to the sort of key dates in here. December 6th is a joint select board and school committee capital planning forum. And again, this is if there are capital projects, and certainly the size of complete fiber construction adds up to something in there. Some discussion about size and scope of those kinds of things is worth it. Is worth discussing. The way the town does capital budgeting, there are some standing portions of the capital plan which kind of go in every year at certain amounts, like $5 million for general capital projects. And then that might be, investments in a fire truck and a new, or squad cars and things like that. So, if we thought we were on the verge of an ongoing capital campaign, broadband might be able to access that. It's, of course, that would be funded through broadband revenues. But anyway, so that's another opportunity to discuss capital. And part of this is in response to a recent task force that just got, that was just run last spring about how does the town do its capital planning. And I think making sure that broadband is part of that discussion is worthwhile. So at the very least, I think being represented in those things and possibly having some brief statements that say, maybe not this year, but in future years, this is likely to be a piece of what we'd like you to be planning for. January 8th is the preview meeting where in the warrant, and also the day that the warrant opens. So between January 8th and February 2nd, is the window in which, if there were a warrant article that was going to town meeting, we would have to have it drafted and submitted to town council for install there. So those are those dates. What's a little unclear to me and right now, and I think we should get clear on it, is we're required to create a report on this subject for town meeting. And what isn't quite clear to me is, what does that mean? Does that mean, I don't think it means a report in the warrant, which would be a February 2nd. It could be in the annual town report, which is a book that's completed every year with reports of committees. That's usually published or edited and published in January. And then, of course, the Finance Committee report, which goes out right before town meeting, is kind of the last way to report something to town meeting. So we could also do a standalone report that we simply publish. But at some point, we have to kind of figure out how we're going to deliver what we're delivering, and then what our real deadline is for that.
I guess my understanding was that the committee's report would be due to the select board and the town manager before town meeting. And,
Yeah.
with the intent that if there's something came up and a warrant article was warranted, then that would be part of what the select board would consider. So it wasn't my intent in drafting that the report be to town meeting or be something that must be considered at town meeting. It was just a timing thing.
Okay.
You got to do some work between now and town meeting and figure out if there is something that could be proposed.
Right.
Does that make sense to everyone?
I think that does. So these weeks, it gives us the earliest possible, if we were doing something that actually required town meeting action. If we expect that we're not going to be actually seeking town meeting action, then we could do something that's runs a little bit longer than that. That said,
Let me ask one quick question, if I may. Go ahead, Gordon.
Oh, well, just a couple of things about the way that the town works. A lot of the light plant stuff just goes on the consent calendar. On the other hand, the AMI rollout, we have actually funding authorization from about 5 years ago to the tune of $2 million or so. So some does have to go out.
right.
Anyway, I'm not really sure of exactly. There's governance and there's kind of turf that goes on between basically an enterprise like the light plant and the town, where an example would be the town treasurer, was his name Carrie, is it? I forget town treasurer's name. She actually has executive control to a certain extent over the light plant, and yet the light plant has its own director, its own financial controller, and so forth. So it's a little bit muddy in my mind exactly what process a budget, a capital authorization would have to go through. But the fact is that the light plant, even if it's independent, can't just go out and borrow as much as it wants, because that would ultimately, if it went too far, drive down the credit rating of the town as a whole. So there are limits. I'm just not sure that, a request that amounts to buying a couple of more bucket trucks has to go to the finance committee. That's all I'm saying. I'm not sure that would really work that way.
So I don't know if two comments. First of all, my understanding of the purpose of this committee was to provide recommendations, not to actually advance a motion or advance an item to town meeting directly. As far as I understand, the deliverable is a report. The other thing that I think we should definitely consider here is that one of the sorry. The other thing we should definitely consider is that maybe what we would generate, depending on what deadline we decide we need to do, is a preliminary outlook and an ask for more time, because we've talked about that a few times, which is the notion that there just isn't enough time to actually complete this work within the compressed constraints by the time we got started in the back end that we're looking at now. So those are two things I think we should consider.
I agree with both of those thoughts. And the reason here for looking at scheduling is to kind of, I think, set some intermediate decision checkpoints for ourselves. my sense is that it's pretty unlikely that we actually need a warrant article. So therefore, we don't need to feel particularly constrained by that calendar, except for to be aware of things that are going on. I do think, though, that fiber construction on the scale that we're talking about to complete the fiber network does eventually need to work its way into the town's capital planning process, meaning the light plan and the town's capital planning process. And so that boat sails approximately once a year. And these dates essentially articulate when that boat is sailing for this year. And a year from later, approximately, is when it will sail the next time. So, if we envision that we articulate some goals and some process that we then gain support from the light board, from the select board, and from the finance committee, because those are the actual, sort of decision makers in this area, then we could anticipate that they might be ready to act on those proposals a year later, from now. So we might be talking about something that's going to the 23 town, the April of 23 town meeting, and funding projects that start that far out, which, there's nothing wrong with that. The other means that's available, of course, and this is why I think looking at a broadband budget is within the operating budgets of the light plant, there's a certain amount of capacity for a certain amount of capital projects, which run
Can't be the light plant. It has to be the broadband fund. The broadband is a separate.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The broadband fund.
Sure. And that may be part of our recommendation is, and maybe that's an alternative we'll offer through our reportage. There's two ways forward. One is to approve another X million dollars of funding to do that build out, or B, accelerate the rollout to those that already have it and use that money to do that. There may be actually an alternative to offer there.
Yeah, or a combination of both of those approaches.
Right. And maybe that would be something we would want to do a little modeling. I think I could certainly do that for us.
Okay.
Having done it before, it would be an interesting exercise. I'd love to go back and touch that model again in that way.
Yeah.
I mean,
In the meantime, and as far as scheduling goes, including today, there are 3 meetings in October left, or 2 more meetings in October. There are basically 3 days in November that are available, 3 dates in November that are available to us as well, because there's only 4 Thursdays in November, and I think most of us want to eat turkey on one of them. And then December has a lot of Thursdays, some of them right up against the holidays. January 20th is an interesting day because that turns out that the select board has scheduled a special town meeting. That's for the middle school project, and it's on a Thursday. So it stands to reason that we would not schedule anything for that, which doesn't mean we couldn't work on another day or something, but just for your awareness. So I really just wanted to bring forward all of these things and kind of have a discussion about some of the so we covered the timeline, the available dates, we covered the town meeting dates. And so we just had a little bit of a discussion. I think that I'm getting a sense of the committee that we're headed towards a standalone report with recommendations and something like that. But we could hear more about that. And then what's our next steps?
It's a little frustrating in a way to say that, see that, we'll miss a November 4th deadline and then a January deadline. And, gosh, that just pushes everything back a year. But actually, I think that's too pessimistic. In a way, we've already accomplished something. Just standing up the committee has changed the stance of the light board towards keeping an eye on what's going on at the broadband division, the broadband enterprise. And it's getting a lot more attention now. I'm seeing, like I mentioned, from the report from this most recent light board meeting, they're staffing up and increasing. So, let's say we even borrowed a lot of money, unless they actually hired further and invested even more in certain facilities and so forth. I don't know how much quicker they can actually go. And now we're diving back down into operational details, but it kind of affects the question is what's possible and what are standing in the way.
So one thing we could do, Gordon, is we could just we know some bracketing around that. We know that somewhere in the 25 to 30 at the low end and somewhere probably in the 60, maybe upward of 80 at the upper end for modeling purposes. We can just take those numbers and start to lay that out in the model that just extend the model that I've already done. And maybe that would be a worthwhile thing, Mark, for me to give a quick summary of that model during the next meeting. And people might be interested to see some of the different analysis we did, which, this was where we really showed growing faster. All of a sudden we had to raise $2, $3, $4 million instead of just the original ask was $1 million. I think we got another $1 million, of which maybe half of that was taken. It would be useful. We've talked about that, but that model could be used as a vehicle to kind of illustrate. And maybe that's part of what our message to the light board is. Let's make them familiar with it, and then they can make the decision of how fast and how do they want to invest in it, or whoever the funding authority is. We're not necessarily the funding authority, and to Mark's point, maybe it's some hybrid. So maybe there's along that axis, I think there's a continuum.
Yeah.
So Scott, when you said those numbers, could you put some units on them? What?
Oh,
Installations
installations
per month. Installations per
Yeah.
month. Sorry, 30
Okay.
per month,
Yeah.
which is the nominal rate. They said they're aspiring to go to 40, and I was saying if you were just trying to 40 per month installs, and maybe in the upper range, just for the modeling purposes, we would pick 80, 90, 100
Okay.
a month, and then actually on top of that, if I was doing this model, I would layer in a depressed number over the winter months, as we've described, end of November to beginning of late April, and just say that we're always going to have a slump there, just because of the nature of the weather.
Yeah.
So
And a slump, which I think actually, I'm not the person to tell them what to do, but I actually think that they can mitigate that. If there's an expectation to do so.
Yeah, no. So that's interesting thing about the timing. The mitigation would have to take place during the summer, right?
Yeah, maybe too late for this year.
Yeah, that's too late for 2022 summer.
Okay.
But
so to expand on that a little bit, when we were working on how to do the build out, we created a monthly model of the business that showed an increasing amount of indebtedness basically over the first 4 or 5 years, and it was very sensitive to how many installs you did, because they were driving your cost faster than your revenue. I think that to me, and I think it's a great suggestion to revisit that, and I think it's also a great suggestion to revisit that in conjunction with a look at the current broadband budget and finances, because one of the things that's happened is, since it's been about 7 years, much of that initial debt has actually been retired, and the broadband fund actually has money. So we were starting at zero and knowing we were going negative right from day one, and then eventually coming out of the bottom of that valley some months or years later. But actually now we're starting at a level that's already got a positive amount of cash flow, and could potentially, so the question would be, is that enough to just do an acceleration or an augmentation? And I think for getting some ideas of what the sensitivity of that is a useful thing, especially since I think it helps us articulate what the goals might be of when should we, as a community, reasonably expect that fiber construction could be completed if there was a set of goals put in place to complete it. Because I think that one of the reasons we exist is because we recognized as a town that there wasn't a goal to complete it. We were just using it as is. So that's
It's like a mindset. We might be able to actually adjust the mindset or the philosophy or the management attitude towards what the rate of growth is. And yeah, I think you could probably cause some, not nightmares, but sort of panic attacks in staff management and boards if we propose something that's going to drive the enterprise into deep negative. But
Yeah.
so we want to, and that's where your model, boy, if we could get something going on that model, Scott, that'd be awesome.
Mark,
But to
suggest
balance
something?
it off against this really great place we're going, which is in terms of having a larger user base, which will lower unit costs and increase revenue tremendously. So,
Mark, can I have, I just want to ask a question here. I actually pulled up the last version of the model, being a digital pack rat, I had it at hand. From 2015, by the way, that was when it was October 2015, so it's 6 years old. Would you like me to give folks like a 3 or 4 minute walkthrough to give them a general sense of what it looks like?
I see Dave shaking his head.
Okay.
I also know I mean, he's nodding his head, not shaking his head.
We can do it next week.
It's also about 5 minutes so let's give ourselves maybe 10 minutes just for a brief introduction. I'm going to suggest that we actually do a deep dive on this next week. I think that, I'm willing to go maybe ask for the current financial reports, and we should spend some time with this because I do think that it's useful to understand sort of some of the economics of fiber construction as we wait for other data. If people think that's a good topic for next week's agenda, then that's what we'll do.
That sounds good. I'll go out on a limb and make a prediction or a bet, which is that the model doesn't capture the log jam at Concord Green.
Oh no, absolutely not. It's only expressed in terms of installs per month.
Right.
Yeah, and then that's actually one of the things that's killing us. And I don't really yet have a great sense. I think maybe getting some staff in or the light plant director is going to explain, anyway, because but that's something we really got to get a handle on.
Yeah, and it goes out 135 months.
Cool.
So, 11 years or so. Yeah.
So did you want me to go over it all now or just next week?
If you want to just, let's just take maybe 5 minutes or so. I see we only have one member of the potential public here for public comment, so I'm anticipating that period's going to be very short tonight.
Okay. Let me get past a frozen screen after all that. Make a liar out of me. Oops. Here we go. All right. So this is going to be a little bit of an eye chart. But let me just explain how it works. And there actually are a few graphics in it. So for example, what we did, this chart was the by-month profile that we used to build the plan out. And so it goes out for a very long time. And so basically what we did is as we did this, we did things like factor in the bandwidth cost, which we knew to be decreasing over time. We factored in staffing, shared staffing costs, office rent space, smart grid allocation, which is money that we would pay back to the smart grid for the use of the fiber and so forth and so on a monthly basis, and summed up expenses. And then at the same time, tallied up installed users, which are up here, which is somewhere up here. Every time we do an install, there's a cost for that install. And so the net of all that is what kind of a deficit do we create in terms of the cost model? And so here, day one, we sunk a bunch of cost into it and actually got worse before it got better. And you can see that over this graph here, the expenses, income, and balance, out in months 60, 70, which is 5 years, I guess, you start to see this thing come up in the particular scenario that's plugged into the details here. Now, what I did was this detail, we worked a number of different ways. So over here, this sheet is just a capture of a number of different scenarios that were worked one at a time with this detail. So and actually there's a profile for installs per month, and we actually started at a very low rate, meaning rather lower numbers here. But the summary is a capture of each one of those scenarios and what it might look like. And so I think this is our nominal model, and we'll go into this in details when we as we go through this, but it helped us guide us to part of what we were calculating is what kind of rate we would charge, how much would we allocate to the smart grid per customer, the number of installs per month. And then you have to go back and look at the profile. And obviously we were looking at much lower numbers than we were talking about now. We were talking about 10 to 30 installs per month. And then summing the amount of cash that was necessary. And so part of what we would find in different scenarios here, the amount of cash would get up closer to $1 million. And so when we chose to ask for $1 million, it was based on the worst of these profiles and so forth. And then another thing we calculated, when was it cash neutral? When was the net cash zero likely to occur? So forth and so on. So, and then there's other assumptions that we put in here for such things as the cost of money, bandwidth required per customer, allocated, so forth and so on. So anyway, this is the general nature of the model. And again, it's there is an install profile, which just goes out, over time. And you can see it goes out to December of 2022 in its original design. And then there's other things that assumptions we made about personnel costs and so forth and so on. So that's the very quick summary.
The quick takeaway, the curve that grabs my eye is that dish shape that dips down and comes back up. And if I eyed your model correctly, it was at 15 a month, and then it was, I think, a couple of years. 5 years.
I have to go
maybe?
back and study it. Yeah, I'm
basically that would be a very useful. And you know what? I think the light plant staff are very likely. I'm thinking of Matt Cummings, is likely to be able to comprehend what you presented there and say, yeah, you know what, and say, yeah, I bet you that they'd be able to respond to that based on their experience about the effect of growth on cash and profit.
Yeah.
Frankly, my recommendation is whoever is responsible for the business of the broadband should be keeping that model up to date.
Yeah.
It should be continuously updated with actuals in the past. I mean, this is my own engineering program management experience. The way I defend any program that I do, and many of them are multi-million dollars, is I present to my management at least quarterly actuals up to today and projected going forward. And that model should be updated at least every quarter in that way, so that actuals exist for the last 7 years and projected going forward.
Well, we're getting that now from the light plant, or from the broadband, but it's steady state. Right. So yeah. I think part of the discussion here is if we try to step on the gas, what effect is that going to have?
Yeah, I mean, from a business operational viewpoint, what I would recommend is that the model be brought into alignment with what it already exists, including how much debt we have, what our real costs are today, because maybe many of our assumptions were bad. This was based on only talking with outside entities that were doing this. And now we have historical data that would be much more accurate. How many technicians, what is the internal cost? I suspect there's some wrong numbers there in that regard. And then that becomes the basis for how do we project, then taking that and then working the scenarios of accelerating deployment to those folks that already have the cable passing versus dumping another $1 million or $2 million into it to go after these new opportunities. You can run those scenarios through the same model and say, okay, if we dump another 2 million into it and we go after this many more, our input will be tell them, if you build out 1,000 houses more, that's 20%, roughly 20, whatever the number is, and the uptake out of those 1,000 is 300 homes that will actually take the service, there's that much more revenue. We can factor that into the model and see how we pay for that. That's the kind of closing the loop that I'd like to see us do, or at least enable the broadband and the light plant to do that modeling.
Well, you know, the broadband enterprise paid back a lot of the money they borrowed. They paid it back to the light plant. And, you know, that was required under rules of accounting. But, and it was a done deal by the time that the board was asked to approve it. But, you know, one of the questions I had about that later was, hey, couldn't we have put that on a different capital plan and stretched that out? And then the broadband enterprise would have had more capital available to do exactly what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Scott. So this is where part of what the opportunity here is to just make some adjustments to, you know, to the strategy, to the high level thinking, which right now is things are going fine. We're in steady state. We can just add users as they come along.
Yeah, those are good points. And in fact, a lot of that is covered. So, you know, building on that profile that Scott just made when I was operating that unit, I did in fact continue to track that. And, you know, we didn't smoothly borrow money the way that chart does. We borrowed it in lumps and paid it back on various schedules. But those actuals are actually documented in the old budget books and annual reports, and, you know, the enterprise budget books that we publish. So, and I'd be happy to take us through some of that. I think the key thing is to understand the concepts and then work with what they might lead to for goals. So I'll take the action of structuring an agenda that will take us through that and hopefully bring us all to the same level of understanding so that we can then use that to inform what we might suggest in terms of future investments. Dave, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I've been in and out with a broadband connection here.
Okay.
Which may make a case for my getting something different. So I may have missed a comment because it's been for the past 20 minutes. When you're, I may be a loner here about this. We talk about how
I'm afraid David seems to have frozen. So just for the purposes of document, David, you froze for a minute on us. So
yeah, but tell me if I'm freezing, because it says now I'm freezing.
Okay.
How do we address in our report, and I think we should, the fact, and I've raised this before, that, you know, one path is, let's call it, you know, we call it the final mile, but how do we incentivize CMLP to sign up that 70% that they're not reaching, that today could sign up and are not signing up? Because, you know, with the financials that you've shown us, Mark, a buck invested returns 30 cents.
Yeah.
That's a way of funding some of what they need, yes, without going for a warrant, without going for borrowing. That's such I mean, I will say that as a person who ran a very small business, I wouldn't loan CMLP a nickel until they got better results on the untapped resources.
Yeah, I did a little math.
What's the incentive for them to sign up more people?
Yeah, well, it should be. There is a real incentive because there's a real return that's available.
I'm frozen.
The business running the way it's running today is already generating, I think, something like a 17 to 21% return if I read the numbers in the most recent report, which is a pretty decent return for a municipal entity.
Yeah.
Already. And the question is, what are they doing?
So why wouldn't you go to that well?
Yeah. I heard, why don't we go to that well? And then you froze, which is good enough for me.
You could try turning off.
David, you might want to just turn off your video. Sometimes that's
if I turn off and turn on, if I lose you, I'll try to get right back on. Okay.
Turn off the video and leave the audio on, and so we can hear you.
The video is what takes all the bandwidth.
Yeah,
I have a,
I'm gonna try to turn off.
okay,
Give me a second here.
yeah.
You can also just dial in with your phone if you really are stuck.
Gail, why don't
yeah, so what about like money that would maybe be from the, I think it's called ARPA, money from the federal government? I mean, is that something that the broadband enterprise could just accept and start spending? I mean, I don't think that would town meeting action be required for that?
No, typically, and Terry's a good source on that, and I know she's not here at the moment, but for grants that we'd get under a program like that, normally that involves, a entity like the town manager, the light board, or the select board, depending on how the application process is written, simply asking for the money and saying what they're going to spend it on. So David, why don't you use your audio only and not your video? I can't hear you yet. You're on mute. Okay, now try unmuting.
At that well that returns 21%,
Yes.
extremely exploitable well. And I'm not suggesting that they don't get other funding, but I've always been concerned that that well's not being exploited.
I agree with you. And so I think the first thing to do, and this is I think where we'll wrap for tonight, is let's get our arms around what the financials actually are based on the reporting that's already being done to the light board, which they don't necessarily have enough time to do. They're in the process of building the 2022 budget now. That was also reported out by the director yesterday, and they have some priorities and they work on the core network, but it's possible that there are other priorities that we might also want to suggest they consider, and those are things that we could get to relatively quickly in this process. So I think that spending our time trying to understand the light board's financials, I'll pull together some of the historical information. We'll look at Scott's model and we'll discuss the capital planning process, so we understand what kinds of things go into that versus what kinds of things go into, say, normal installation operations. And we'll get a handle on that next week. So I have 8:10, which means we have been going about 90 minutes. So I'm going to just pause here unless there's an objection for if anyone has any additional public comments, or if anybody from the board wants to make kind of a final closing comment, and then suggest that we adjourn for tonight and plan to convene next Thursday at 6:30 again.
I did want to note that it sounds like the model was pretty good if you broke even in 5 years, right? I mean, isn't that kind of when it started going positive? So
it was a pinch myself. I can't believe this was as close as it turned out to be kind of moment.
Yeah. Well, you did good.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. I don't want to say, please me guys, and ladies, I didn't want to sound negative, but it sounds like a model that should be certainly exploited for
Right.
more significant returns.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't take that as negative at all. And I think the fact that the model did predict where we are today is a good reason to use it again. And
Yeah.
it should be more, have a stronger force of, reason behind it.
In the life cycle of the business too, I'll just say that the whole purpose of trying to do a business plan on a model was to try and figure out whether A, you could start the business, and B, you could get the business to the point where it could sustain itself. It did not try to say anything about what do you do once you get to that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fairness, that's where we are now. And we're getting together again to say, okay, that worked. Now what?
Yeah.
Is it
Our
fair to ask?
deepest concern was to get to the point where we broke even. And we're
Which we've done.
As an outsider, you all have much more experience in this. Is it, if you had to rank broadband on the CMLP, 1 to 10, where is it on the priority scale? Maybe that's an unfair question.
Well, I mean, the broadband kind of took a hit when it had an outage that lasted too many days.
Yeah,
What was it, this summer? And that made everybody wonder if maybe it wasn't high enough on everybody's priorities. But you know, success also speaks for itself, and
Yeah.
it's a great business. And I like to say Concord's the best town in the country, in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that broadband is part of the reason why it is. And you know, you asked earlier about how to incentivize the uptake. I think that broadband's going to continue to improve. And, you know, if we get really good subscription, then that could drive down subscription cost, and Concord Light Plant and broadband stand as shining examples of how a municipality with smart and dedicated people can actually get these things done themselves.
Yeah.
And do better than a lot of these other, you know, ISOs and
Yeah,
investor-owned
yeah.
utilities and stuff like that. So we're headed in the right direction.
okay, great.
My answer to that question would be, and you know, I mean this in all seriousness, the light plant does two things. It does electricity and it does broadband, and it does them in that order, 1 and 2. And I think if we think about our own homes, if the electricity is not working, maybe it's nice to have broadband, but I'd really rather have the electricity working.
Yeah.
And so there's an appropriate level of priority around that too, you know, and I say that as a person with a real soft spot for broadband. However, having said that, the question is more probably, you know, is it being done as well as it could be, or as well as it needs to be to meet expectations, which is a whole different question. And that's, I think, where, you know, some of the events that happened earlier this year raised some questions, and some appropriate questions. There's only ever going to be 2 priorities at the light plant, as near as we can tell. It's going to be electricity and broadband.
Yeah, if I can add that, I would add a third, only from the Concord Green experience. Ours is electricity, EV charging, and broadband.
Yeah.
When we needed advice on EV charging, CMLP was great.
Yeah.
You know, within several months, we had a charge point charger here through CMLP.
Yeah. Okay.
But when it comes to broadband, it's been 5 years.
Okay.
I'm sorry
Yeah.
about that.
So
Okay,
there's-
I mean, you know, I'm not Gordon. I mean, you know, there's things you try to figure out, and we're just trying to figure it out.
right.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
We'll try and do better.
On that note, if there are no public comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn really this evening.
I motion that we close the meeting for tonight. This is Scott.
Seconded.
And we'll take a roll call.
second,
for
if you can
that.
hear me.
Yep.
Yes, David, I'll take your roll call vote first on the motion to close the meeting. David Hessel,
I,
Scott Hopkinson,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
and Mark Howell,
Hi.
and Gail Heyer, aye.
Thank you all. This has been a great discussion, and I'll look forward to, let's dive into the financials next week, and that'll be great.
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 Okay.
Okay.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.